Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us at the Neoliberation conference this morning. I'm very pleased to open this event with my talk on automated video surveillance. And since I've got a lot to get through, I will get very started. Surveillance footage is increasingly used as visual evidence of real events by the media and press. They are used as proof in courtrooms and substantially help in criminal investigations. From a media theory perspective, surveillance videos constitute aesthetics of objectivity, as they invoke a real-time visual mediation of events. News channels present surveillance footage as black and white snapshots of a moment that represents an occurrence and make evidentiary and conclusive statements about what has happened. Emphasis is always put on the legitimacy of the image, since they derive from official institutions such as police agencies, and thus articulate validity. But closed-circuit television, known as CCTV, has become smart, has learned how to process information, and actively engage in the scenes they are recording. Surveillance cameras, in their most advanced forms, are strongly enhanced by computational technology. My talk here is an investigation into video surveillance, especially in the US and the United Kingdom, in relation to its socio-political framework, and what happens when intelligent machines watch us. I will set out by drawing a trajectory of the imperatives behind video surveillance and describe the political background of current surveillance studies in order to analyze two key implications, which is, first of all, on an individual level, the creation of the new subject, a data double, and on the second, on a societal level, the emergence of new modalities of the self and other as a form of racial discrimination. So let me begin with the political background. So after September 11, 2001, the United States has propagated the idea of a global state of insecurity described by George W. Bush shortly after the attacks with the words "an extraordinary emergency," which derives from the threat of impending dangers from terrorists. This declaration, in consequence, has been used to justify war, break international contracts, and has led to a militarization of internal security. This last point is of particular importance in this context because it has led to a dramatic enlargement of the role of intelligence services and a critical downsizing of the function of the judiciary and the parliament. While some argue that these attacks have changed the way in which terror is defined and called for a new age of global terrorism, of hyper-terrorism, it can also be argued that the biggest novelty of this attack and the subsequent bombings of London and Madrid a few years later was arguably not the amount of violence deployed against civilians, but foremost that the aggressor was not a state, not a government, but a clandestine organization who became more credible than ever before in its claim to initiate a war. This is a critical fact because never before was an organization, in this case Al-Qaeda, able to provoke a country in this magnitude without being part of a mass movement. What is more is the way in which 9/11 was treated in the political narrative. What has become quite clear in the aftermath of these occurrences is the emergence of a new specific form of governmentality, that is a governmentality of unease, as the DDO has called it, which consists of practices of exceptionalism, where derogation rules have become commonplace, with new intensity placed on surveillance. The measures taken since have been seen as measures against the fear of the unknown, that we can be lurking behind every corner, and perhaps even within one's own territory. It is the fear of the impending threat coming from a strategic actor, perhaps an organization of a few dozen of people or an individual, who became believable in their threats to another nation. This is a crucial fact that changed the socio-political discourse and the rationale behind policy decisions. The most pressing question has become how it is possible to find the distinction between the hostile other and the friendly normal in one's own territorial boundaries. How can you find the enemy within, and how can their intentions be anticipated to prevent an act of violence from happening? In other words, it is the ambition to find an unknown and potential terrorist. The solution was found in technology's ability to scientifically discriminate the enemy within. It should be clear that this endeavor is not an undertaking that requires the utmost amount of resources, and video surveillance is one of these means that has been enhanced since. And video surveillance has long moved from simple TV monitoring in a monitoring room. Video surveillance has become heavily reliant on highly sophisticated software and deploys complex algorithms. The cameras, in their most sophisticated form, have been networked with other systems carrying biometric information for the identification of a person and can be connected with various databases to gather information on the subject. The databases contain sensitive data such as medical records, criminal records, or tax payments, amongst others. The goal is to control individuals in the most invisible way possible. Another essential trait of video surveillance is its capacity to track the movements of people and to recognize patterns of behavior. The system is vested with a form of technological agency, automatically initiating responses or alarms when a certain data configuration and abnormal behavior is detected. Moving on from the political background, the technologies behind video surveillance demand a rethinking of what the human subject is and how the state exercises power on it. Since most of the monitoring is directed towards the human body, it is crucial to analyze what processes are operating on it and to what result. An important question is thus what the mechanic gaze does to human subjectivity, as well as how power relations constitutes themselves on the body. According to the theorists Hardy and Erickson, video surveillance has the effect of making the body into a hybrid composition. In the process of watching, the body is broken down into flows of information which abstract the body from its territorial setting, only for it to be reassembled in a different setting of pure virtuality. The result is what the author called a data double, that is the decorporealized virtual existence of a human being constituted of the algorithmically assembled data. What comes out of the algorithmic assemblage is hence the empirical reality of a person's virtual clone. There are several concerns arising out of this network structure of video surveillance and its reduction of human substance into virtual data. The politics operating behind it, the will to control time and space, present and the future, goes beyond anti-terrorist policies. It creates a powerful mixture of fiction and reality, with the effect of merging the boundaries between them and introduces fiction into the reality of video surveillance. This is due to the technological rationale, the algorithmic logic that surveillance is based on. Depending on the way information is classified, indexed, linked, and made accessible, the combinations of information will change. That means that depending on the way that the data is put together, the data double may acquire a multitude of completely opposing forms and meanings and is hence vulnerable to manipulation to be so inclined. As a result, the assemblage shakes historical and biographical truth by the openness to multiple truths, perspectives, chronologies, facts, and identities. The depth and identity of the present is lost in the fragmented version of the body, and it becomes separated from its present understanding. This can be dangerous because the data double is increasingly constructed as a new form of truth, more real and authoritative than any subjective sense of reality held by an individual. This said, the question arises of who is liable for the hybrid composition. So far, the algorithms cannot combine all variables that need to be taken into account when assessing a situation. For example, there is always a degree of uncertainty as the conditions and knowledge of events on the ground. Yet algorithms become more and more sophisticated and act increasingly independent from human decision maker as legal agents. My question thus addresses the legal dimensions of algorithmic liability and accountability. Who is responsible for the creation of the data double? Since they are an assemblage of data, who is responsible for wrongful assemblage, if you will? Technically, it is the algorithm because it is the one who puts the information together according to its own logic. But the thought of taking an algorithmic code to court is quite ridiculous and absurd at this point. However, if we invest them with more and more agency, then perhaps the legal system might have to come up with a new concept for an algorithmic personhood, perhaps, that would fit the legal criteria. Arguably, then, they are already legal agents, meaning that they have the executive authority to be employed and operate with a certain authority. They are programmed to freely make decisions based upon their own algorithmic logic. But is it enough to affirm free will in the judicial sense, which is a precondition for criminal liability? These are all questions to which there are no answers yet. There's insufficient understanding as to how the algorithms come to a certain outcome, but it is clear that the issues surrounding them have a much larger reach than just computation. Essentially, the law will have to broaden its reach of legal responsibility. Thus, I come to my second feature of video surveillance, that is the watching of movement, to, on the one hand, learn about a person's habits, lifestyles, and preferences, to then, as a next step, determine patterns of behavior of the society at large and construct what is deemed normal and abnormal behavior. This information can be pre-programmed in the video camera so that they can trace, compare, and recognize certain movements. Through the creation of the data double and the construction of patterns of behavior, the surveillance apparatus constructs a categorization of people. Therefore, a key fact of video surveillance today is that it approaches the human subject for the purposes of social sorting to distinguish the normal from the abnormal for the sake of security. Thus far from the eyes of the public, a refashioning of the policing and surveillance is taking place. Through the enlargement of scope and intensity of the technologies of video surveillance, biometrics, and shared databases, knowledge of the other is acquired as a resource for the management of life. Through the data doubles and pattern recognition, it is possible to classify and sort in order to formulate and statistically determine who is deemed abnormal. All this effort seeks mainly to at diminishing the roots of violence before an offense is committed, by anticipating the behavior of dangerous individuals or groups. The aim is therefore to search for signals of an offense that might be committed in the future. And the easiest way to do that on a large scale of the entire population is to determine what constitutes normal and abnormal behavior. So if the ambition is to anticipate a future behavior, a decision to act as a consequence is thus not based on hard facts, but on profiles, assumptions, and simulations of a possible future. This applies the reading of the future as a form of the past through surveillance technologies. It is a reversal of time to prevent events from happening in the future by identifying the causes of predictable events. From the initial scenario, say, the immigrant or the ghetto youth, to the final image, the terrorist and the drug runner, say, all the steps of transformation are reconstituted virtually. People are assigned identities that are not even lived as such. The radical thought behind this process can be illustrated if you consider that an intervention is carried out on the basis of virtually violent behavior that never needs to be actualized. The justification for this preemptive defense is the argument of the imminence of danger, which is propagated with a lot of vehemence in the state of exception. It is argued that the surveillance apparatus is based on the ideals of rational decision and objective assessment of the data. The main advantage of this policy is that it hides itself behind technological neutrality. It is claimed that a certain computational objectivity has been achieved through the algorithmic processing of data, removing the possible biases and imperfect perceptual capacities of the human perception to perhaps form a new epistemic virtue. The surveillance apparatus appears unaffected. It appears unaffected from classical racism. For the biggest part, this argument can be refuted when considering that the technological programs are still a product of human creation, which implies that the human biases and perceptions are programmed into the computer codes comprising the surveillance system. It merely constitutes a translation of human imperfection into computational form, since social categorization, for instance, is still done according with political narrative of who forms an enemy. It rather inserts human biases onto a much larger scale. The biggest denial of video surveillance is hence its inherent racism. Racism that is based on statistical deviation of the normal. So justified by a proclaimed state of insecurity, video surveillance has been set in place to reinstate normality. And machine eyes are now everywhere and have the capacity to record, store, and compare a great amount of data. They have become not just passive observational tools, but active in the sense that they are processing the world, see for themselves, meddle with reality, and produce a new social regime. It is rather ironic how society has legitimized the rule of machines under the pretense of more objective and rationality, more precision and more safety, when it has mostly achieved more division and dissolution of the very nature of human subjectivity. I would like to make one conclusive observation. And I would like to suggest that the circulation of video surveillance footage through the media is the propagation of a disguised government agenda, disguised through the legitimacy of computation and the good faith of the people in this system. It may be less obvious, but the images are far from neutral and are not free from a certain amount of indoctrination. Video surveillance footage propagates and tries to induce the feeling that the state of exception is being handled and taken care of by the government. But most importantly, it inserts the image of the other, the unwanted and the unwelcome into the people's minds. This way, the future government agenda concerning these groups of people will be easier to justify, since the motive is already implanted in minds and recognizable by the population. Surveillance videos circulating through the media thus become the representation of the public enemy and a documentation of social exclusion. The cameras produce an alibi of responsibility and in the name of security. Surveillance videos thus far bear witness to the government trying to bring under control the wide-reaching insecurities of our time. These records are perhaps the strongest evidence of a condition of paranoia that seems to be driving the type of technological reasoning. So this is to give you a short introduction into the processes of video surveillance. Obviously, given the amount of time, I couldn't help but generalize some things, but well, yeah, that's what it is. Thank you.
What I deal with be scared. It's not as difficult. Mainly what I deal with big data and machine learning, and mostly the ethical technologies that make possible a plethora of technologies that are made possible by machine learning and big data mining. And Yasemin did a very eloquent presentation on the practical effects of those technologies, which is a wide range of them. So particularly these technologies, you can see here the title of what I'm going to give today, the paper I'm going to give today, is slightly different than what you have in your program. And the reason being is this is an ongoing meditation on statistical learning, particularly machine learning, and the role of the algorithm, and particularly the agency of the data point within the algorithm itself. And so what I'm going to talk about are sort of the broader implications of things such as surveillance, of things such as internet search, all the way down to the passive data collection on the smartphones that we all have in our pockets today, and large sort of ethical debates, and how those ethical debates begin to inform our sense of identity and our sense of agency. And this talk is mainly based on the idea that we all believe in data. In fact, we're overwhelmed by it to the extent that there's a growing gap between the generation of data sets and our understanding of its potential uses. Still, data informs the conditions and long-standing interests by which our knowledges about social situations are understood. Not to mention, as Oscar Ganby suggests, most public decisions these days are made on the basis of some analysis of data, and we also just watched a great presentation on that Yasemin described. Inexpensive storage space, more advanced data capturing devices, and agile databases have made the collection and storage of overwhelming amounts of data both more feasible and desirable by researchers and industry. As such, the convergence of learning-based computation and data aggregation has produced a society that feeds on information. These actions are not limited to the personal. The ubiquity of data-driven apparatuses aid in the delay of decisions about the usefulness of generalized information in favor of developing advanced tools like learning and prediction methods to dig through models of data in search of answers to social and political problems. These problems extend across a wide spectrum of concerns, from accurate predictions of weapons targets to more mobile-friendly search engine results. Nonetheless, they are, by the very process of their design, fallible to social consequences that are most frequently articulated in forms of biases, segregations, and other social restrictions. If sufficient attentions aren't given to ethical issues that surround machine learning activities, and that's when these sort of technologies become particularly dangerous, that the answers to these concerns are found in profiling and prediction models, and often themselves initiate political, industrial, and social actions without specific aim, speaks to the continuation of an intensity to categorize social information and social agents into consistencies of performance-based assessments. As this paper argues, these logics are founded in historical and contemporary mathematical processes that necessitate further considerations of the social, technical, and political outcomes that inform the relationship between human and machine. The most prevalent context in which we find ourselves in engagement with the machine is perhaps also the most taken for granted in applications of machine learning technologies. However, before we explore these complex areas, it is necessary to define what I mean by machine learning. In many ways, machine learning is best understood in its abstract notation, where automated learning converges with mathematical rigor, inferred scientific curiosities, and desired social outcome to establish generalizations that mark either simulation or changes in human behavior. In many ways, machine learning is the product of a new human-machine relationship that at its more practical extreme can be described as the acquisition of structural descriptions from examples, the findings of which can be used for prediction, explanation, and ordering of complex human and non-human systems and behaviors. Nonetheless, there's a common and underlying theme in machine learning research that David Barber describes as a technology with the ability to learn something useful about environments where agents operate. And do any of you know what machine learning is after that description? Essentially, machine learning technologies, this is to diverge for a second, give a genealogy. Machine learning technologies derive from a few disciplines, one of them being artificial intelligence and the other being computer science and also pattern recognition technologies. Machine learning relies on statistical math to dig through mounds and massive amounts of data to find learned patterns. So essentially, it takes input data. It enacts an algorithm itself. The algorithm is just a step-through process that has no agency, particularly. The algorithm just does what it's told to do. And so the input process will step through the algorithm and will self-learn based on the training data and outputs of the statistical analysis. So in a nutshell, it's machine learning. What's particularly important about machine learning technologies and statistical analysis is very similar types of algorithmic processes are the ones that make your Google Go, your Siri work, your Google Maps work, your Google search work. They're the same particular technologies that make drone targeting work, police preemptive technologies such as stop and search, so on and so forth. And so that's why the ethical debates concerning machine learning are particularly important, especially as they begin to drive automated systems such as self-driving cars and self-targeting drones. So that's why this is a very particular sort of area. And quite, I won't diverge and say it's quite nihilistic. There are ethical debates that say machine learning is quite nihilistic. And at any moment, Skynet will be enacted and we'll all be doomed. But it's quite more nuanced than that. Because these technologies actually add value to us, we have to start questioning what is the role of the human-machine interface. And given the importance placed on those assessments of those metrics that I just talked about, such as potentials for innocence or guilt in judicial systems, customer relations in industry, and determinations of threat and security frameworks, and how statistical analysis is being used indiscriminately in local and national ecologies to anticipate these classifications, it is surprising how few laws or comprehensive ethical debates exist to help individuals better understand both the potential benefit and fallibilities of machine learning technologies. Neither does the insufficiency of debates surrounding laws under consideration protect individuals from the dangers of putting these technologies to use as mechanisms for determinations based on projection of personal actions and associations. Without these considerations, due process is often overshadowed by database preemption into what Brian Masumi articulates as a civil sphere that no longer stands outside of administration, but invokes an administrative response that lives within the morality of citizenship and assumptions of best interest. One particular practical example is the Google self-driving car just had its 13th accident. Right? Didn't know that. It was rear-ended, and ethical debates are emerging, especially with self-driving machines, because out of 13 accidents, none of them were the machine's fault. So as the political and social debates start to look at the viability of machine learning technologies, it's really challenging the way we actually view itself as a machine. Where machine learning technologies become particularly important is a decisional framework. And where it becomes particularly sort of discerning is how we interact with the decisional framework, especially as we have an automated machine, which will make the decision whether to hit a passenger or to protect the driver. Decisions that are typically left to the human to decide. In 13 accidents, the human was responsible for the accident, so it furthers ethical questions about the role of the machine in these technologies. As such, I would like to highlight the relationship between allowable human and technological practice and the politics of mathematical logics, particularly in relation to the position of data in machine learning technologies and the role of these relations in contributing to biases either in ethical examinations or applications of machine learning technologies. Here, it is important to understand how the simulation of human behaviors has become a relationship of statistical certainty and prediction, rather than a heuristic field of experimentation, as seen in earlier steps towards data-driven analysis. It is perhaps taken for granted that the ubiquitous data society we know today developed through a gradual process informed by a series of mathematical technologies. These technologies relied on historical mathematical logics or symbolic languages to inform various relations. among scientific treatments and ordinary social processes. Notions of a uniform and testable language that could be systematized into a formal logic constituted the basis for a series of algorithmic tasks which took into account the rule sets that could extract meaning from largely inconsistent input or training data. In the 17th century, these technologies came to associate the quantification of social characteristics with the power or potential impact of data aggregation. By the 18th century, data collectors, largely amateur statisticians, were put into service of nation states as administrators, formalizing data aggregation and data mining practices. Within this transition, the foundation of mathematical knowledge, as well as pressing questions about social variables, were systematized in considerations of statistical probabilities, and as such assumed mathematical certainties. These certainties enlisted mathematical reasonings into logics that ordered and scaled social environments, even as the certainty of doing so remained unachievable. Most revealing is that intangible searches for certitude within the social were articulated as empirical laws that generated power within government administrations and private industries. It is my intention to demonstrate that mathematical reasoning is intricately in relation to the desired outcome of both social and political aims. I also seek to reveal that the logics of power are revered in their capacities to aggregate and analyze data, and as such generate new applications with biopolitical capabilities that can inform or deform modes of citizenship. And essentially, where the meditation lies is the mathematical and machine learning processes, especially the data aggregation processes that are of such concern today, particularly when we consider surveillance, when we consider police aggregation, stops and searches, any other ethical debate that you can think of, come from a long genealogy of mathematical logic dating all the way back to the late 17th century. We tend to think of these technologies as new because we have new mechanisms in which they articulate themselves. But the idea of state surveillance, the idea of state aggregation, and the idea of social aggregation and social quantification has a very extensive genealogy within our culture. So in a way, the machine itself is distracting from the human condition. Especially in our pre-existing condition, the machine itself really sort of, it foreshadows the idea that for a few centuries, we as humans have been obsessed with data collection and aggregation. We just today have the tools to make it much faster and much more extensive. And so my research in particularly traces the genealogy of mathematical rigor, because that's where it all began. And seeing what part of our human condition implicitly ties us to the machine in this quest to learn more about ourselves through knowledge and data aggregation. These claims are particularly pressing because the Open Technology Institute, an organization that supports innovation and fosters open technologies and communication networks, states that different data revealed through our daily digital habits represent tiny pieces of our identities, which can then be used to establish imbalances in social relations. When aggregated and analyzed using different big data techniques, these data profiles may run counter to how people define themselves, as well as impact their ability to shape their own destinies. While the prediction of complex social phenomena are fascinating developments in the merger of information theory and social science, their practical applications in civil processes, such as policing or policies that affect communities, have dire consequences for communities that are disproportionately targeted by law enforcement agencies for the potential to commit criminal offense. And essentially what we're seeing now in 2015 is an articulation of an old 17th century logics of mathematics, which was developed by the first statistical tables that were captured in Prussia and spread throughout the West, mainly here in England, then in Spain, and subsequently in France. And the idea were old logics that if we could collect the amount of males, particularly at this time, if we could actually aggregate data on the amount of males, that could be extrapolated into a social condition called the power of the state. If I know how many males I have that are able-bodied, and by able-bodied then I need to quantify what able-bodied means, and by able-bodied, If I have this amount of males, it equates to this size of army, which equates to this size of power of state. Where it becomes complicated is the realization, particularly in the early 17th century in Europe, which is, if I know my statistical numbers, there's nothing stopping my enemies from knowing my numbers as well. Thus, data became a state secret. And the genealogy of that state secret now gets articulated in black box processes that we see behind drone technologies, behind the distribution of weapons, behind state secrecy, and sort of the ownership of data. Where this becomes complicated and not quite nihilistic is we fully buy into the black box processes. Raise your hand if you actually know how your mobile phone works. Raise your hand if you actually care right now that there's probably a gigabyte worth of data been transmitted since I started talking. And whether you actually care. I doubt that, because then you wouldn't have a mobile device. Because there's a certain amount of benefit now that we are getting from the same technologies that could potentially be used either for harm or potential innovation. So the question is a complicated question now. It's no longer a question of let's release the data, let's let it freely roam, let's release the algorithm to do what it does, because these algorithms are making our lives easier. I just read an article that virtual reality is now tricking stroke victims into using weak limbs. So how can the same machine learning and virtual technologies, for that sense, how do we reconcile that ethically with the same technologies that can target a kid based on gait and movement in a so-called enemy territory? How do we reconcile that, and which one do we choose? Now we're back to the same debate that the Google self-driving car has, right? Hit the pedestrian or protect the driver. But these also have sort of very practical implications. Specifically, for instance, the Lewisham Safer Neighborhood Board Stop and Search Scrutiny Group from July and August 2014 suggests that young black men are stopped and searched by police twice as often as non-black citizens commuting through the same area. We all see it. It's actually by Amersham Arms. That's the stop and search point coming from the A2. Notably, the selection of stop and search candidates by police are assumed random and self-organized prior to any findings of criminal offense or arrest. So while the move away from manual processes to digital models promises the efficiency of policing activities, in practice, the subjective remains as a determinant of racialized motivated behavior. The relation between local security and data is quite revealing. The police and national security agencies have shown increased interest in methods that derive from advancement in machine learning practices, particularly those in biometric systems, which Yasemin talked about, that capture facial, eye, fingerprint, and other characteristics for use in identifying individuals. In the last decade alone, decisions about the emergence of data models that can foresee social behavior to reduce neighborhood crime have gained considerable amounts of attention from researchers and local authorities, particularly agencies seeking to preempt antisocial events based on historical behavioral patterns. By doing so, security agencies aim to anticipate where and when crime will take place and by whom crime will be committed. The predictive logics are in accord with the convergences of data collection and social policy making in the 18th and 19th centuries, as I spoke about. But then it was primarily based on birth and mortality rates, and later on what were considered social deviations from statistically derived averages of human behavior. Today, a combination of inductive and deductive logics are put into place in the form of social profiling that risk producing classifications such as race, or what Tiziana Terranova calls a bioracism, not to mention class, sexism, gender, and other forms of othering. Oscar Gandy defines racial profiling specifically as a low-level form of predictive technology, whereas the criminal profiles used by police may contain a number of components or characteristics of persons thought likely to be engaged in criminal behavior. Racial profiles tend to collapse the relevant sets and place greater weight on the race of the individual. And what I mean by this, and especially what Oscar Gandy means by this, he works with statistical processes, being a low-level form of prediction is the reason why the algorithm itself has no agency is the algorithm is trained by analog data. It can never have autonomy because its sheer function, even its learning function, is already infinitely regressed to a data point that's input by a human. And that data point itself has its own genealogy of cultural implications that go into the algorithm. Where this is particularly discerning, especially when we consider stop and search mechanisms in places like Lewisham, is it forms an echo chamber, or what we call an echo chamber. Most of you are familiar with an echo chamber. It's your Facebook newsfeed. You like cat videos, it gives you cat videos. Right? You like the Tories or not this girl. You like a certain political party, you click that party, you will get news associated with that party. And what the algorithm is doing is it's self-learning your profile, your capabilities, the things that you like. Now, what we tend to neglect, especially with nihilistic terms of algorithm, is we neglect the fact that you're the one that clicked the video. We sort of think these algorithms are just autonomously working, but they don't really know how to work outside of our own engagement with it. Where this becomes concerning, particularly with police, is when we stop and search in Lewisham, it's a subjective process. So the police are distributed by a machine learning algorithm, which has already been trialed and gone. It's a third-party company called Preemptive in London. It's already been piloted. I believe it's already initiating at this point. And what it does is it takes statistical analysis of crime hotspots in London, and it helps the police identify which areas to distribute police cars. And these areas are based on other crime, very characteristics of crime, seriousness of crime, and a desired outcome. What's particularly interesting about these is we also ignore the desired outcome. And what I mean by that is the algorithm will distribute police based on what the input specifications are. So if the London Met says, I want to reduce, I don't know, knife crime, the algorithm will target knife crime. If the London Met says, I want to reduce gun crime, or I just want to reduce, I just don't like the Amersham arms, then they will target the Amersham arms. So where it becomes an echo chamber is the fact that since the process, especially race, is hand-coded, and what happens is the officer chooses a person, will hand-code that person into the system as a particular race. It should know for London, I believe there are only 3 or 4 categories. There's black, non-black, and other, I believe. Those get hand-coded. I believe black is C3 or something, goes into the digital database. Well, the digital database says there's been an arrest of a young black male who's been categorized as an input into machine learning. That person becomes a statistic on this map. Where it becomes an echo chamber is immediately the algorithm thinks, now I have a problem of young black males in Lewisham because the number is higher. What was particularly discerning about the statistical data from Lewisham Stop and Search initiatives is that, of course, they stopped twice as many black males as non-black males. It initiated twice as many arrests as non-black males. And the proportion is telling in its simplicity, and essentially means that if they stopped twice as many non-black males, they would have gotten twice as many non-black arrests. But statistically, in the echo, we keep reinforcing the same processes. I'm running out of time here, so I'm actually going to just skip forward before I conclude here. I think I've said enough about it. But basically, what I want to highlight is again, I'm wedging my research within the ethical debates. It's not exactly all like a nihilistic type of process, which I keep emphasizing. And the reason is because data is a subjective process. Because data is, as Simone would say, a trans-individuating process, which means we're implicitly tied with it. It's also a mechanism for resistance and subversion. The algorithm only knows what its training input is. So technically, if you change your behavior, the algorithm is forced to change. It has no sense of who we are as people outside of our inputs and our desired outcomes. One particular example is sort of a very, it's just sort of an aesthetic example, would be sort of police mapping violence. Now, I just showed you previously what's used by the London Met. I'm not quite sure of its value, but used by the London Met to sort of identify crime hotspots in here. Based on the statistical data, I can make inferences and probably tell you these are the highest concentrations of minorities and immigrants in London, right? But if we go here to organizations such as the Mapping Police Violence Project, what we see is data also being used to visualize and show social action. So this is actually a temporal map of real-time killings of black males in the United States and popping up where those concentrations are. So this data can also be used to extrapolate and concentrate cells of resistance where it's most needed, just as the police use the algorithm to extrapolate where the efficiency of cars are distributed. These can also be used for other purposes, which I'll fast forward to. Can you tell us the general purpose? Yeah, okay, there we go. It's not food trends that I want to emphasize here. Okay, screw this up. There we go. This is actually from Tactical Tech in Berlin, who they do a lot of resistance work with data, a lot of training. Essentially, this map here will allow you to enter in what news site that you're currently interacting with, and it will show you where your data has been transmitted prior to you getting a visual aesthetic display of the news. The red is actually an illegal transfer. The blue makes sense because most of the majority of servers are on the east and west coast of the United States. So we'll go there first, bounce back. What becomes particularly interesting are the red and the crimson and why your data is being transferred to these countries prior to it reaching you here in London. So these mechanisms starting to emerge. I'm out of time, so I'm going to wrap up there, and I'll save any questions or anything for the panel. Okay, thank you.
Hi. So yeah, I'm going to be presenting a genealogy of quantifying devices. Studying my PhD at the minute at Huddersfield, and the PhD is called, the title of it is Quantifying Devices of the Design Body. So it was interesting that we heard about the ideas of devices kind of overshadowing the kind of logics of algorithms and mathematical data. And the idea of this with looking at devices and the idea of design is to use design as a critical way to analyze culture. So if you define design as being the consideration of significances, and then a device being the synthesis of those significances, then you don't have to focus so much on the device. It just becomes a kind of path to look at this alternative genealogy. So a quantifying device, as I'm defining it, is a device that can quantify the intimate and the vital. So that's the any happening phenomenon or event, anything, making it calculable or measurable. So the intimate is the relation of the user body to an external other body or phenomenon. So it's like geographical position or conversations, anything like that. So that's like Facebook or geotagging. So if you look at products like the Hero, which is a scary GPS tracker for children, so the parents can see where they are. You can get live feedback from where your children are, and the narrative clip, which is quite a famous one now, which is this small camera that takes photos every 5 minutes or 10 minutes in different time gaps. And then this is organised in geographical positioning as well as weather and things like that. And the vital is anything essential pertaining to life or the body. So this is what this main genealogy is going to be on at the minute. So that can be anything like heartbeat rate, blood pressure, body weight. So these are like your standard self-trackers. Two of the most interesting devices for this at the minute are Aura Ring and Cube. Neither of these are available yet. Aura Ring is released in September, and Cube is still pending. The Aura Ring uses its functions to explain the length of time it will take to recover from something. So if you're exercising, how long it takes to recover from that. And in an interview that I conducted with them, they also mentioned something to do with hangovers as well. You can see what your ideal individual hangover sort of cure is. And the Cube is a device that can take swabs, so that's blood, mucus, and what else? And saliva as well. And it'll tell you about possibilities of influenza and your testosterone levels. This is quite an invasive device because it will also synchronize to your iPhone or your calendar. And if it sees a gap in your diary and you need to do some exercise, it'll put in, you need to do an hour and a half jogging. So the idea of the genealogy is to present a kind of alternative history of these devices, rather than it being this kind of linear progression or kind of technological progress or anything like that. It's more about understanding the ways in which the devices have become populated. So this is focused between 1900 and present day. So if anyone's doing a genealogy, you're basically focusing on these two. So each from Foucault, your main basis framework for the methodology and the method of the genealogy. So methodology is being the knowledge of the method, or the kind of the essence of the method will come from Nietzsche. And the methodology, and the method, comes from Foucault. So in Nietzsche's methodology, it positions the idea of presenting an alternative critique of history, as well as the idea of multiple perspectives. So this is the kind of subjectivity of it, rather than the kind of singular objective viewpoint. It presents the foundations, an electrocardiogram, which is how you're measuring heart rate activities, and he transmits it over telephone wires from 1.5 kilometers away. So this is the first time, as far as I can see, other than what you can call teleconsultation, which is a doctor calling on the telephone, that actual medical data was transmitted over telecommunications. He said it was successful and differed in no way from him actually being in the hospital doing the diagnosis himself. So this is diagnostic quality, which is important to realise that. So, yeah, Eindhoven says it requires special installation. These are the negative points. It requires special installation. It's a complicated operation, weighs 600 pounds and occupied 2 rooms. This is the standard progression of technology, NASA's computers, now on your phone, and all the rest of it. And so in 1947, Norman J. Halter created the Halter monitor backpack. So this is effectively, wearable technology. This is 85 pounds out of 2 batteries, have an ECG transmitter. So this is wireless now. This was then later positioned with an electrocardiocaster and electrocardiorecorder in 1962. So you can see, this guy's top pocket, he's got a transmitter, and over here in a briefcase, he's got a receiver, which is, but unfortunately, it still had to be applied using what Halter called the usual paste, which sounds a bit odd, and they had to be held on the chest with cotton and tape. So you can see there's a real push towards the idea of having discrete technologies that were doing something quite complex. And then in '82, Polar releases the first wearable heart rate monitor. So obviously this is a real leapfrog jump from milestones, and it is linear, but it's explained later on how this differs. So, and interestingly as well, Polar, these guys, they're ex-technicians, as well as Nokia's ex-technicians in Finland, worked on the ring that I showed you before, the Aura ring, which is interesting to see that they picked up those guys because they're a startup company, so keep an eye on it. So in 1970, you get this eruption of e-health, which is being talked about in the World Health Organization, the European Commission papers. And this is defined as something that is the further development of the idea of telemedicine. It's also called a continuum of activities. It means of intelligence and connected data systems, occupied space in and between the 2 worlds of the internet and healthcare. So again, it's like, what's nonsense? And there's one paper that's realized there's 51 unique definitions of e-health from about 2001, I think, paper was conducted. So 51 unique differing definitions. And if you go on Google Images and type it in, you get the same kind of feeling of no one really knows what e-health is fundamentally about. So it's best to understand e-health as a metaphor or a vessel that can contain some alternative mediums rather than it being a concrete, a concrete event that's happening. And the way it gains its definition is through ostensive auditing technologies, so it can adapt surrounding technological developments as if it is its own. So it becomes an active development of telemedicine. It's not an active development of telemedicine, sorry, but it's instead a passive adoption of seemingly relevant proximal developments. So rather than a progression, the e-health keeps the patients at a distance, and it's no longer to heal, which is medicina, at a distance, tele, which is the telemedicine, but it becomes a device process as opposed to a specialist procedure. So there's no longer a professional involved within this process of health or well-being or anything like that. So what I decided to do was go into all the archived patents from 1950 to 2014 with anything with a reference from ECG monitor or EKG monitor or heart rate monitor. And to look inside a patent, to file a patent, you have to explain the utility, novelty, and non-obviousness of the device. You have to disclose the invention in a manner sufficiently clear for the invention to be carried out by a person skilled in the art. So it's a kind of, if you want to, like traditional ideology kind of idea, is unveiling this fundamentals of what a device is. So stripping back these promotional side of it. So putting all the results in a graph, counting how many times user was mentioned in a patent and how many times patient was mentioned in a patent. Kind of don't get much from that, fundamentally. What I was hoping for was that the amount of times patient would be said would drop and users it right. But what you do end up seeing is that there's a clear dominance between one or the other. It's in any single patent, usually patient is said 200 times and user would be said 5 times. Or user would be said 500 times and patient would be said 5 times. So there's a clear concentration of ideas within a single patent and a single product, which shows a definite shift. So where this kind of leaves us now, at this point of self-tracking, is a change in direction of interaction. So interaction is understood as an operation between 2 points. The interaction previously with telemedicine was through someone who was ill and a professional who was getting into contact with them from a distance. Then this shifted with e-health from a worried well, which is what the NHS literally call people who aren't ill or are interested in their own health. So the worried well to professional platforms, which would be internet forums or emails to GPs, things like that. This is e-health. And now it seems to be the self talking to the self, which is my fundamental idea of this design body, where there's insular contact. So there's not actually, it's not radial in there. It's not reaching out, the interaction within. So this is the idea, fundamental idea of design is from Phil and Fluter, and how he defines design as an active trickster, an active trickster, but where the design person and the design is the trickster and the tricked. So there's these sort of dualism that's within the same body, the same domicile, which I thought was something that was also previously mentioned. Yeah, the idea of the responsibility of getting away from the idea of the black box or the autonomy of the algorithm to this more in-depth responsibility of the self talking to the self. And this can change the fundamental arguments of how to criticize and critique the ideas of the new medium in the self beyond this idea of distantiated black boxes. So that's the way of working. Thanks.